Thanks, Seth. I'm Angela Clark, as Seth said, a Quality Enhancement Specialist with CQL, and I'm so glad you made time to join us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kendra Julius, also a Quality Enhancement Specialist with CQL, and we are very excited to present today's webinar to you today about intimate relationships, decision-making, information gathering, and all of that fun stuff.
We're going to start the webinar today with some information about CQL. Our vision is a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people, and our mission is to be dedicated to the definition, measurement, and improvement of the personal quality of life. Since 1969, the Council on Quality and Leadership has been a leader in working with human service organizations and systems to continuously define, measure, and improve quality of life and quality of services for youth, adults, and older adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and psychiatric disabilities. CQL offers accreditation, training, certification, research, and consultation services to agencies that share our vision of dignity, opportunity, and community for all. Quality of life is why CQL is committed to partnering with providers and systems for organizational transformation. The personal outcome measures is an excellent tool to help us learn about people, about how you support people, and identify ways you can change what you and your organization do to influence support systems. This change, this journey, is what inspires us to commit to partnering with service providers and service systems who are on a continuous journey for quality, organizational change, and transformation. It's that change, that enhancement, which motivates us. Change is measured through data. CQL's commitment to the collection, analysis, and reporting is evident in everything we do. As a result, we have multiple sources to assist in these efforts. The data informs and guides decisions for people supported, for organizations, and for large systems. Throughout this webinar, we will be discussing data specifically related to the outcome people have intimate relationships. As you know, person-centeredness is at the heart of what we do. This focus on people guides us along the journey. In the early 1990s, CQL realized that people who use services were missing from the table. CQL invited people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, people with lived experience in mental health services, parents, and thought leaders to join in focus groups to look at quality measures. There was a big difference in what people and their families wanted compared to what professionals wanted. The personal outcome measures, or POM, were piloted in 2 states, 3 organizations, and then field tested in the US and in Canada. In 1993, the first POM tool with 30 outcomes was published. In 2005, data analysis led to combine several outcomes, reducing the number to 21. At multiple stages, factor analysis and validation testing continue to demonstrate the validity of the 21 outcomes. CQL's initiative to redefine the quality in terms of personal outcomes using the POM influenced subsequent person-centered approaches at the state and federal level and within the disability community. Recently, in 2017, CQL completed a revalidation of the POM and demonstrated continued validity of the 21 outcomes. Based on statistical relevance, they were reorganized into 5 factors. The POM offered person-centered solutions that work to keep people happy and safe, offer people real choice, and wisely direct valuable resources. The 5 factors are my human security, my community, my relationships, my choices, and my goals.
So people have intimate relationships as under the my relationships factor of the personal outcomes. I'm sure you guys registered for this webinar today because you wanted to learn more about how to gather the really fun information about what people define as their closeness and their desires for these kinds of relationships and more clarification about what those relationships could be. So today we'll be talking about key concepts related to people have intimate relationships, information gathering related to how to find out all of the things that people may want to include in this area as far as their relationships go, how to make effective decisions using the personal outcome measures in the 4th edition of the manual, some common misconceptions that we frequently see throughout our travels throughout the United States, Canada, Ireland, and some other things that people commonly mistake as being intimacy or not being intimacy. And we also have some resources for you at the end because we don't want to leave you with nothing at the end of this to follow up with. So with intimacy, we are continuing to build consistency and reliability with decision making and data around the personal outcome measures. This is one of the several webinars where we will guide discussion and provide information to that end. Other webinars will focus on additional personal outcome measures. Please continue to visit our website for registration information on these and other webinars that we may host. You'll also find previous discussions about different personal outcome measures that we've already covered on our website. So when we look at Merriam-Webster to define intimacy, we see that it's the state of being intimate or familiarity. It's something of a personal or private nature. Now that's probably not surprising to anyone. So we looked into intimate more closely, and there's many different definitions for intimate, and that's kind of where this webinar is going to go today. So it can be marked by a warm friendship developing through long association. It can suggest informal warmth or privacy. It can be being engaged in, involving, or marked by sex or sexual relations. It can be of a very personal or private nature, and it can be marked by a very close association, contact, or familiarity. So it's not all about sex, but it can be about sex. So in the question and answer box, please feel free to let us know if you guys can think of any other types of intimacy that you think are important. These are the ones that CQL, really our staff focus on when we're talking with people receiving services about intimacy. So we look at intellectual, social, emotional, physical, and sexual intimacy, spiritual, financial, creative, and recreational types of intimacy. Services can sometimes blur the lines about what's normal to share with everyone, especially in the context of having someone else manage your finances, who you have fun with, who you worship with, etc. And that can make it hard for people to really define what their needs are in this area, and for people to have the proper experience, exposure, and education about kind of what's appropriate and what people may, desire from a partner or people that they're close to. So with that being said, people may choose to express all, some, or none of these types of intimacy. It's really up to the person. As usual, it's defined by what people want. And people may choose to express all of the types that they want to express with one person. They may split those different types among multiple people, or they may have evolving expectations for each type and each relationship that falls under intimacy for them. We wanted to look at some data here around personal choice, because as I said on the last slide, people may choose not to have any at all. And while that's true, when we look at the data from 2019, so pre-pandemic, we're seeing that that's only about 15% of people are choosing not to have intimate relationships due to personal choice. All right, so often when people don't have intimate relationships, it's not due to informed personal choice, but we are seeing that people do have intimate relationships. Now, this has intimate relationships. This is not saying that intimacy is in place for these people, right? It's just that they have some relationships in that area. So you can also share some more comments in the questions and answer box if you have any other examples of sharing intimacy. But these are the ones that we thought were really interesting and important to talk about. So some examples of sharing intimacy might be talking about politics or philosophy, cuddling, holding hands, kissing, creating art together, sex, passion, and pleasure. Going on an adventure can be a type of intimacy. Worship can be a type of intimacy. Caregiving during an illness or injury may fit the definition for some people. Budgeting and co-signing loans. And this is one we really want to focus on because this is where services can blur lines, right? But the only person I've ever signed a loan with is my husband. Because money is something that's really personal to a lot of us. And when we think about services, that doesn't always happen, right? Where it gets to be that personal thing. Also sharing a meal and drinks, that's something else that sometimes gets blurred. That's what I do with my family and my close friends. It's not something I do with people that I consider my acquaintances very often. Can you guys think of other examples of intimacy or other things that you're not sure may fit into this? You can throw those in the question and answer box and we can address those throughout the conversation today. We have a nice quote here from Raji. The thing he would like to do in his life is to get married. And I think that's probably really similar to a lot of us. If you look to your book for guidance, you'll find in the narrative, it says that for some, intimate relationships mean that people are committed to one another. They trust each other and they know that they will not be rejected by that other person. For a lot of us, that's our spouse that fits that role. And for the people we serve, that's no different. People want to have relationships. They want to have intimacy with other people. Some people want to get married. Some people want to have children with those that they want to have relationships with. So it's really about discovering what's most important to each person and what they value around intimacy.
I would like to touch upon some of the key concepts of this outcome. Some of the intimacy concepts here are people determine what they desire for intimacy, including the type and the scope. The person determines how many intimate relationships they want. For some, one person may meet their needs for intimacy, while for others, intimacy needs may be met by various people in their lives. The person's values drive this outcome. The person's choices are respected and celebrated by those who support them. Each person has the right to express their sexuality. This includes their sexual attraction, behavior, and orientation. People are responsible for their relationships and sexuality, but they may not exploit or dominate another person. Our manual says that people have a different level of need for intimacy that goes beyond friendship and family ties. People define the meaning of intimacy in their own lives. In this quote, Bethany recognized that she has the right to speak about intimacy in her relationships and to not be judged because she has a disability. When we look at what intimacy entails, please consider that people have the opportunity to explore their feelings and desires, to evaluate experiences of their own, to make choices about intimate relationships in all areas of intimacy that Kendra listed earlier, to form, pursue, and maintain intimate relationships, to have education about the expression of intimacy and sexuality. When we talk about information gathering, it's not only with the questions from people who have intimate relationships, but we're also, sorry, Kendra.
You're fine, you're fine. Like Angela said, it's not only the questions from people who have intimate relationships in the book. Information may also be shared from other outcomes as you're discussing them. I often find in my work that talking with people, intimacy kind of naturally comes up in conversations about life and where people live, where people work. People's health sometimes speaks to intimacy when you think of that caregiving nature that can come. Safety may speak to intimacy or lack of intimacy. Personal goals often, people talk about goals to get married or have children or live with their significant other. Natural support networks definitely, friends definitely can lead into this conversation, and protection and freedom from abuse, neglect, exploitation, and mistreatment can sometimes lead the conversation towards intimacy. So we really encourage you guys to follow that conversation wherever it naturally goes, rather than kind of, suddenly starting with intimacy, right? Saying, hey, tell me about your significant others. So as we were just discussing, where does the conversation begin? So it often flows naturally from information gathered about friendships and where people live. We don't want to make assumptions about sexual orientation or identity. So generally, it's really a good idea to proceed with those open-ended questions like we teach in the workshop, such as, who do you tell your secrets to? Who is the first person you share good news with? Who is the first person you share bad news with? We really want to assume that people want intimacy and that it's our job to find out how they'd like support. But also when having this conversation, people can be a little bit concerned about sharing this information, either because of reactions of people in their family or their staff to them when they talk about intimacy, or their personal values make them a little bit modest in this area, or perhaps they don't know that it's okay to have the feelings and desires that they do. So I really encourage you to make sure that people know that you don't have to write down the details they share with you. You don't have to share the details with all staff or certain staff members. You don't have to share the details with their mom or their guardian or whomever, right? This really can be a private conversation if the person desires. And I think that's, really empowering for people to know that they can have these conversations and talk with someone without having to assume that it's going to affect their entire life or upend their entire life, right? So with information gathering, you really want to build upon information from those other relationship questions, like we talked about with friendships and natural supports. Sharing personal information definitely can feed into here, and social roles can too. You want to gather this information specifically from the person. So who is important to you? What types of intimacy do you want with the people that are important to you? What's the frequency of contact you want with each of those relationships? What's your goal for each intimate relationship you have? And do you want to have sex? When, where, how, and under what circumstances? That might be very different for different people depending on what's going on in their lives. For supports to be present, organizations must know and support preferences that are determined by the person. So that doesn't mean that every single staff needs to know every single detail of what the person desires, right? Privacy of the person, to the extent the person desires, has to be ensured for people to feel safe and respected, because that's not something that we all discuss with just anyone, right? So making sure that there is someone within the organization that can support people, but it should be the person that the person feels comfortable with talking about these kinds of things. And that might involve a lot of work for interviewers to really find out if those supports are in place or not, because it might be such a select group of people that get to know or have the right to know those kinds of things. So you may have to ask the person, you know, who's supporting you with this, to find out some of those answers to the support questions. So as we've stated before, when you look on page 59 with the suggested questions for the person, that's just a starting point. They're just suggestions. You don't have to follow them. They won't make sense for every single person in every single situation. For intimate relationships, we have to make sure that it's the right kind of relationship, right? So when we go back to those earlier slides, when we talked about what some examples of intimacy are, you know, some people might want all of those different types with different people. And we really need to, you know, make sure people know that intimacy is all of those different things. It's not just sex. We want to make sure that for each relationship the person has, that their contact is happening as much as they want. So we have to ask, is this not happening enough? Is it happening too often? Is it just right? And is the kind of contact the right kind, right? Because Zooming with a significant other is very different from being in person with them. And depending on the person, they may desire one over the other, or a combination of the two, or other types of contact as well. And then finally, really assess what's the person's future goals for their relationships. So people might express that they have desires to have children with someone who's close to them. They might want to get married. They may want to live together with or without being married. They may want to travel together or go on adventures together. They may want to grow old together. They may want to have someone to have intellectual conversations with. There may be other things that you guys can think of that people may express a desire for, or that you've heard from people when you're interviewing them. It's really important that we ask enough questions to understand what people desire from each of their intimate relationships. And this is a good way to find out, is by asking, where do you want your relationship to go with so-and-so? For example, someone might say that, you know, they're really happy with their relationship with their girlfriend, but they don't live together and they'd really like to do that. So by assessing that, you can find out that perhaps the person is happy with that type of relationship, but they'd like to take it to the next level of cohabitation and maybe potentially considering marriage and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of opportunity there to find out whether or not something is the right type and frequency for people in this area based on their responses to that question of, where do you want your relationship to go? What's the next step for you? Often we find out when people have those significant people in their lives that they're ready for the next step, but staff aren't ready for them to have the next step, or mom's not ready, or the guardian's not ready. And so it's really a matter of not assessing whether or not they're content and happy with how things are, but whether or not they're making the choice and having the control in that situation. So as always with information gathering, we want to dig deeper from clues or hints the person may drop. You know, I often hear about, you know, oh, Johnny is someone that I spend a lot of time with, you know, and then Johnny will come up many times throughout the interview when we ask other questions. And from there, I'll ask, you know, is Johnny really important to you? What's important about Johnny? What makes Johnny such an integral part of your life, that he's involved in so many different areas of your life? And, you know, those kinds of questions can really help you determine whether or not, you know, John's a friend, or if John's an intimate relationship of some sort, whether or not that's physical or social, emotional, those other kinds of intimate. You want to ask open-ended questions, like always, making sure you're really giving people that time and opportunity to respond. You want to make sure that people feel free to express their desires to anyone that they feel comfortable expressing those desires to, as far as those that are supporting them. And this is a really big deal here. So does the organization enthusiastically support intimacy, or is it relegated to specific appropriate types, right, in quotations, because it's not the definition of appropriate by the person generally, right? Is it spoken about quietly, or is it the responsibility for support been arbitrarily assigned to someone else? And what I mean by that is often we'll see that the organization will say, oh, that's a family matter. Families take care of that. Or I don't know that we can support people with intimacy and sex. I think that's something that their guardian has to deal with. So really making sure that the organization and all the staff that are supporting the person know that this is something that people have a right to. They have a right to intimate relationships. They have a right to have those kinds of close relationships that they want with people. And it's not anyone else's right to limit that. It's our job just to support people and make sure people have the tools they need to make informed decisions. Make sure that the organization has provided education to the person and to their staff about intimacy. And this really goes hand in hand with the last question you want to ask. So, do staff know that intimacy is a human right? And do staff know how to support people to have those intimate relationships? And do they know that intimacy is not just sex, but it might be sex for some people if that's what they want? And then you want to find out, has the person had any experiences with intimate relationships in their life? We really want to make sure that as far as supports go, that staff have asked and that they're either acting or advocating, depending on their role in that specific request that the person has about what their life should look like in this area. So again, for every person, we're evaluating whether or not they have the education, experience, and exposure. If you're familiar with the personal outcome measures, you've probably been introduced to the 3 E's a few times. They're the tenets of all of the personal outcome measures in order for people to make informed choices. And for intimacy, it's no different. We want people to make informed choices about the types of intimacy they want and the frequency of contact that they want for those. And when they're ready to move on to next levels or end those relationships, it really depends on the person. And certainly for this outcome, we need to know that the person has all of the education and exposure to choices that may have not been there before. So when we think about the history of services and how people have been supported in the past, or even just our changing attitudes towards intimacy with people, 10 years ago, it was different. 20 years ago, it was certainly different. If we look at 1970, it was very, very different. So we really need to make sure that we're letting people know that our expectations and the way we're willing to support people has changed, and that we really do want to support people to have that right kind of relationship for them, or relationships for them. And making sure people know that those arbitrary rules from the past don't exist anymore, right? That we really are person-centered at this point and want people to know that there aren't rules in place. And then for the staff, again, that's the act of asking. So we have to make sure that people know. People can't ask for things that they don't know. So it's our job as an organization or a supporter to make sure that we're asking and providing that information to people so they know that they do have choices. And then when we learn what the person's desires are, we have to either act on that if we can, or advocate for things to change if we need to change the process. Specific to intimacy, you're looking for the organization to enthusiastically support intimacy. We don't want it to, someone else's definition of what's appropriate. We don't want it to be spoken about quietly or not at all. And we don't want that responsibility to always be put on someone else, like the guardian or mom or whomever. Supports are likely not going to be present if those kinds of things are happening. That being said, it doesn't mean that having mom or your guardian or whomever as your primary supporter in this area would make it not present. It just has to be an active choice by the person. So that's who they want to support them.
Decision making. This is where we decide whether personal outcomes and individualized supports are present. It's important that we apply all the evidence that we've collected. Let's take a moment to review these important steps. First, as with all of the outcomes, it's one person at a time, and each outcome is truly defined by the person. Next, it's having an awareness of the important information about the personal outcome measures, the values, and the principles. Then, as we just covered, there's the information gathering and discovery piece. This includes all information collected from the person, their supporters, the environments, and sometimes from materials. Finally, the decision-making component. The outcome has a series of questions that lead to a decision. The information gathered, or the data about whether the outcome and individualized supports are present or not. This decision-making process presents questions in a decision-making matrix for measuring both the outcome and the individualized support for the person. If you'd like to follow along in your 4th edition manual, you'll find the decision-making questions on page 60. You'll want to ask, does the person know what intimacy is, and how have they defined what their expectations for intimacy are? You don't have to make this decision in order. Please consider what you've learned from the person while gathering information on the other outcomes, especially people choose where and with whom they live, people choose where they work, have best possible health, are safe, people choose goals and have friends, people who are connected to natural support networks and are free from abuse and neglect. All of those outcomes will give you information that will help you in decision-making around people have intimate relationships. Also on page 60, you'll find the decision-making criteria for this outcome. 14.1 asks, does the person have intimate relationships? 14.2, if yes, and they are satisfied with the type and scope of the, are they satisfied with the type and scope of the relationships? When asking decision-making questions for this outcome, consider whether the person has chosen to have one intimate relationship or whether they chose to have more than one person meet multiple intimacy needs. They can express how their intimacy needs are met. Are they aware of the various types of intimacy and expressions of intimacy in order to make their decisions around this outcome? The book says if the answers to 14.1 and 14.2 are yes, then the outcome is present. But if the answer to 14.1 is no, is this due to an informed personal choice? When asking, or remember if it is due to an informed personal choice, we must know that the 3 E's apply and that the person has had the experience, education, and exposure required to make this an informed personal choice for them. As we review the decision-making criteria for individualized supports, please note that in order for the individualized supports to be present, the organization must have asked the questions to know and understand the person's preferences based on active support around the 3 E's. This can also include knowledge and understanding around the person's sexual identity and preferences, and the organization must have provided active support in exploring and evaluating experiences, rather than passive support or waiting for the person to ask, especially if the person does not have the experience, education, or exposure to know what they want to ask for. Some barriers that have been identified during POM interviews include privacy, staff biases, physical limitations, lack of exposure to the topic, the person is actively prevented from being exposed to intimacy, or staff and supports are uncomfortable discussing the topic. In these cases, we'd be looking for robust support to address and overcome any barriers to the person having an intimate relationship, if that's what they're choosing. Now we'll look at the additional considerations for this outcome. The prerequisite for this outcome is the 3 E's. People cannot make an informed choice and have preferences about intimate relationships until they've had the 3 E's necessary to determine their preferences for type and frequency in this outcome. For some people, the involvement and closeness of family relationships may meet intimacy needs. Family relationships that address intimacy go beyond the typical family contact and interaction. They show evidence of emotional closeness and personal reliance that is a result of a positive outcome for the person. While some intimacy needs may be met through the expression of spirituality, for some, the person must have had the experience, education, and exposure in order to make that decision. If a person participates in fellowship and has a spiritual or intimate connection with a deity that meets some of their needs around intimacy, it does not eliminate their need, nor should it negate their opportunity to have other intimate relationships in their lives. If the person has not indicated a desire for intimate relationships in any way, and if the person's preferences for intimacy are known and supports are available, then the outcome can be present. The organization needs to have asked about intimacy and provided active support to explore and evaluate experiences. Make the assumption that people would want an intimate relationship unless or until there's evidence that the person definitely does not, based on an informed choice. As we learned earlier, based on data, less than 15% of people interviewed in 2019 chose not to have intimate relationships in their lives.
So when we're looking at personal outcome measures and applying that decision-making piece that Angela so wonderfully went over, we're really addressing the 3 E's, right? That came up over and over again. We want to ensure that people are making informed personal choices. And that might mean that people have an intimate relationship, but it's not meeting all of their needs, so it's not in place, right? What's the type and frequency? So people have to have the right types and the right frequency of contact in order for this one to be in place. And in order to assess and individualize supports, they must first know the person's preferences. So that means the 3 A's have to be in place for those supporters. They had to have asked and then be acting and or advocating for what the person desires. Active efforts to support and not waiting for the person to ask are incredibly important with the 3 A's, right? We want to make sure that we are making sure the person knows what options they have and knows that this is something that they can ask for, they can demand, they can, have supports put in place to help them if they would like this. They can also ask for no support if they don't want support too, right? So When we think about individualized supports, we have to consider those active efforts to know people's preferences, to provide the support to the person, to encourage people are able to explore their identity and desires for intimacy and closeness with others, to ensure options about intimacy have been pursued with the person, and to assist people to learn newer additional skills if that's something that's a barrier to them. We want to make sure that supports are not gatekeeping, right? We're not saying that you have to do something in order to have an intimate relationship. You know, you have to keep your bedroom clean if you want to have your boyfriend over. That's not real life. And we don't want supports to make it so people don't have real lives, right? We also want to remember that the outcome is owned by the person. So the staff can tell you things, and that's going to support the staff piece of it, the support piece of it. But the staff, guardians, those kinds of people are not going to tell you what the outcome's definition is for the person, okay? The person will tell you that. You may gather it through other outcomes. You may gather it through different lines of conversation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with the misconceptions piece. But we really have to remember that this outcome is owned by the person no matter what. They define what intimacy means to them once they have the 3 E's to be able to make that definition. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about other situations that may arise. So in situations where a relationship has deteriorated or ended, grief supports as desired by the person must be in place for the support to be present. And what we mean by deteriorated or ended is, you know, someone cuts off contact, there's a breakup, someone dies, someone gets very ill, you know, anything where it changes the relationship, whether or not it was chosen by the person, there needs to be some supports. And those may look like, you know, formal grief supports, they may be other kinds of supports, but it's really what's desired by the person to make sure that the support is actually there for them to kind of move on with what happened and not move past it, but, you know, figure out how to carry that forward into their future when they're making informed decisions about what they want. We really want to find out, is the organization providing robust education to all people about intimate relationships? And with all people, we're talking about people receiving services, certainly, but also staff and DSPs and anyone who's working with the person. I think that's something that gets missed a lot, is that we don't necessarily know how to make good relationships as adults, right? Most of us make relationships with the people we work with, or the people that are in our families, or people we've known since childhood, but adult relationships are tough. So we really have to figure out, how do we support DSPs and other staff members to have good relationships themselves so they can support people to have healthy relationships. And, you know, to explore what intimacy really might mean to each individual person. Supports to meet new people is also part of this, right? We're looking at assisting to maintain, but also attain relationships. And we want to make sure that organizations addressing any barriers that have been identified for the person, and that they're identifying if there are barriers, so that way we can support people to have intimacy. Having a barrier is not an excuse for not having an intimate relationship. It's just a reason for more robust supports.
At this time, we thought we would mention a few misconceptions or misunderstandings for this outcome that you might encounter while you're out meeting with people. Most people desire more than one type of intimacy with more than one person. Thorough exploration of different options of intimate relationships is necessary. A spiritual or religious relationship is very rarely the only intimate relationship that people want. It's not just about sex, but it can definitely be about sex. It's incredibly rare for someone to choose to have no intimate relationships in their lives. Having the right type or types of intimacy is important, but that's not enough without the right amount of contact with those people you're intimate with. And guardians generally do not have the right to control this outcome. Over the next few slides, we want to share some data collected about the outcome people have intimate relationships. This data is a result of approximately 1,500 personal outcome measures interviews conducted and recorded in Portal during the year 2019. Overall, the outcome people have intimate relationships was present for 42.8% of the people interviewed. You can see here that the outcome people have intimate relationships when broken down by type of residence is present for more people who live on their own or in their family's home than for those who live in a host family or provider-owned home. The outcome is present significantly less often for those who live in an intermediate care facility. When the data is broken down by the hours of support a person receives each day, it demonstrates that people who have less direct support had this outcome present more often than those who lived in a setting where they received 24 hours of support a day. When we look at data in terms of who's making decisions, people are more likely to have this outcome present if they're making their own decisions or have assistance in making decisions. Interestingly, those who utilize assisted decision-making supports have intimacy present the most often. Could this be a result of them having access to active support to explore and evaluate their experiences in order to make an informed choice? This slide looks at the outcome being present based on support needs, looking specifically at complex medical support, comprehensive behavior support, or neither of those types of support being present in the person's life. Many of the outcomes have been affected during the pandemic. This data demonstrates the effect on people having intimate relationships between 2019 and 2020. While some people may have been able to continue spending time with their significant others or increase their use of technology to keep in touch in a meaningful way, others have not been able to experience their connections in a way that meets their definition of the outcome during this time. Much like you or I are experiencing difficulties in relationships between these 2 years, the data definitely demonstrates that people supported are also experiencing those same difficulties.
All right, so we're almost towards the end, and I see that there's quite a few questions coming in, so we'll have a little bit of time for those, luckily. So some expectations for interviewers, and I think it's very important that we keep this in mind, especially around these sensitive topics, like intimacy can be sensitive for some people. So we don't want to assume anything going into an interview. We need to come to interviews with a basic understanding of sexuality, identity, attraction, and expression. And there are a ton of resources available for us to learn about sexuality, identity, attraction, and gender expression. So it's really the responsibility of the interviewer to have a basic understanding and to ensure that the interview is a safe space for people to share what they like about themselves. People may not want to share, and that's okay too. We can't really expect that people will want to talk to us about their private life details either. It's really our responsibility to listen to what's important to the person and learn how the person defines intimacy. Within the realm of sexual relationships, some people's definition is purely physical, right? Desiring casual sex, one-night stands, hookups, a friend with benefits, all of those things are fine, right? And for the outcome to be present, the person needs to have the 3 E's, and their current situation should match what their desires are. So if they're desiring that kind of, hookup culture relationship, or relationships in their life, and they have the 3 E's to make that decision, that's perfectly fine, as long as, what they need as far as supports is matching what they want. Some people may be deeply spiritual, and that may be their main form of intimacy as well. And we don't want to make any value judgments about what's important to people, right? It's not our place to judge. It's just our place to support people to have the life that they want to have. So we have a final quote for you guys. I would like to have join a support group for the LGBT community. Sarah, a person receiving services, shared. And with our book, again, there's some narrative in there about organizations support people to safely explore their intimacy needs. People should be assisted in making choices and accessing opportunities for learning about and enhancing their relationships. I promised you guys some resources. So if you search on our website, you will see that we have numerous articles, capstones, and tools available for you guys to use to really learn more about sex and relationships and intimacy. I suggest searching in the search bar for intimate relationships, sex, sexuality, anything like that, and it'll give you some good information. But the top 4 areas are some opportunities that you guys can have. Seth is going to put these links in the chat box as well, so you guys can follow the links if you'd like out of the webinar to check those out. So we have the sex and relationship conversation cards as the first topic here. Those are very similar to our rights cards. They can be used to have those conversations with people and help teach people about healthy relationships and what sexuality can be about and those kinds of things. So that might be a good resource. We have a capstone article that was recently published about sexuality, the barrier, supports, and next steps. We have a couple articles that have some data backing up sexual health services that are lacking for people with IDD, and intimate relationships and organizational supports and what the interplay is there. And there's numerous other data sources as well on our website that you guys can look into. I would also suggest that you guys look at the Human Rights Campaign website for sexual orientation and gender identity terminology and definitions, just so you make sure you're familiar and comfortable with that, especially if you're, gender conforming yourself. This might be really, really helpful for you to get an idea of what other people may experience or what other people's identities may be. just so you can have those conversations without having to be educated by the person, about some basic terminology. And then finally, one of my favorite podcasts of all time is Disability After Dark. It's by a young man from Toronto named Andrew Gurza, who has a disability and likes to have a good time with some other gentlemen. So you learn a lot of different things about the LGBTQ community, what it's like to have a disability and have supporters supporting your sexuality, and what supporters need to know to support people to have the kind of sexual relationships they want. Because while intimacy isn't all about sex, it is also about sex. All right, if you guys have any questions for us that you don't feel comfortable having answered live, or if we don't get to them, you can always email us at our email addresses that are on the screen. All right, so we'll get to some questions now. Seth, do you have anything you need to say?
No, you've all went through everything very well.
Okay, so Jeremy shares not a question, but there are definitely things listed that I would not have thought of that make sense. There are certain topics many of us will only discuss with those when we are close to them. Yeah, and that's something we really support you guys to consider is, what kinds of things are we doing with people in people's lives that may be kind of crossing a boundary, right, of intimacy, and supporting people to understand that those aren't things that they have to have everyone involved in their life, and that they can really have more choice and control in that. Great comment. Patricia says, I think it's important to understand the definition of a relationship for people. We may panic when they say that they want to have sex, when really their understanding is that sex is holding hands, not something to panic about. Yeah, and I think that's, with the whole spectrum, right, of intimacy, we don't need to panic about it at all. If people want close relationships, we just need to provide education and support, and then try to understand what people want. And make sure that people have the information to make informed personal choices. That's really what this is all about, is finding out what people want and supporting them. Anything to add, Angela?
I don't think so. I think that's a good answer.
Okay. Lauren says, if the person you support tells stories about her past sexual experience and seems to want that type of relationship, how do you manage that with the person? I think we go back to what Patricia said, really. We want to support the person to make sure they have the 3 E's, which it sounds like this person has some experience. And we just, help them have the supports that they may need to either find that kind of relationship again, be safe within that relationship, of course, or at least have the tools to be safe if they choose to be. And making sure people are making informed choices and having the supports they need to attain and maintain those relationships, if you will. Hopefully that answers that question. If not, you can type another one in. Lisa says, what kinds of questions would you ask to explore whether family connections go beyond typical contact to meet some intimacy needs? Yeah, so that's a great question. And a lot of this is going to depend on the person and their relationships with their families. So I would really ask questions about, what kinds of things do you have in your relationship with your mom, for example? That's what I hear a lot for intimacy, is that mom is one of my most intimate relationships. And that's definitely true in my life. My mom is one of my closest relationships, but she goes beyond that kind of typical relationship you have with your mom, right? It's not just that she took care of me till I was 18 and, she talks to me at holidays. She does things that I would consider something close. So I would ask the person, what kinds of things does your mom do that you think goes above and beyond her being your mom, or that makes you feel like she's someone you can share all of your secrets with, or it makes you feel really close and connected with? You really want to determine whether or not the person just doesn't have any experience with really close relationships and thinks that mom is the end all be all, or if they really truly have that kind of really close relationship where, that is their trusted confidant. So I would ask questions like, is that someone you tell your secrets to? Is that someone that, you call first when you have really good news or really bad news? Those kinds of things. Hopefully that answers that question. It's going to depend on the person a lot. Angela, anything to add?
No, I think that I wouldn't add anything to that question. I would tackle Caitlin's question though next, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Caitlin asks, if a client wants formal grief supports but none are available within their financial means and insurance, are there other affordable options? I would say, Caitlin, look to the community. So if someone's seeking grief counseling for a death or loss of a partner, often churches or community groups might have grief counseling local hospices might offer something for people who are left behind. So there's lots of opportunities for those kinds of supports that are typically free in the community.
Fantastic. So any resources available that you would suggest for supporting folks with a desire to have intimate relationships but are focused on age inappropriate relationships? So Liz, I'm not sure if you're referencing to people that may be interested in minors who are adults. That's kind of where my brain thinks you may be asking about. And honestly, in that area, you probably want to get a therapist involved. Likely you have one involved, but really having that conversation with the person and making sure that they have someone that they can talk to kind of work through that piece of attraction would be a good start. I know there's communities online that support people to avoid those kinds of relationships when that's their desires. And so that's something you could look into as well. But I don't have, firsthand, here's a great resource for you. Angela, do you have anything?
I really don't have anything additional.
Okay. I know there's some organizations that do an excellent job of supporting people that may have offending histories.
Mm-hmm.
That might be somewhere to look. You can email us and we can get you connected, okay? Bethany asked, how should a provider communicate with a legal guardian of a person who deters someone from having intimate romantic relationships? So with guardians, we always suggest that you guys make sure you know what the guardianship papers say, first and foremost, right? Does it say that they have control over the person's relationships or not? That's going to help guide that. Of course, you want to have good relationships with people's legal guardians because you want to be a supporter in the person's life and you don't want anything bad to happen with that relationship, of course. I always recommend using person-centered thinking tools to kind of help map out what people want when there's kind of that conflict with that guardian and what the guardian wants, and then see if you can find common ground and ways to support everyone to feel comfortable with what the person wants, right? First and foremost, our responsibility is to supporting people. I would also make sure that the person has the education, experience, and exposure to make their own informed decisions about things like intimate relationships, but also about what the purpose of guardianship is, making sure we're providing that education to guardians about what their job is, which is to help the person make the decisions they'd make if they were able to, right? And all of those pieces can really play together. Now, that's not a good short-term answer. That's kind of a long game there. But with most things, this takes a lot of effort and continual conversation. Anything to add?
Sure, no.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want me to go ahead with Jessica's question?
Sure.
Do you have any suggestions about how to gather information and conduct decision-making for individuals with limited cognitive ability? Usually in getting information from important people in the individual's life, the responses are biased. How do we as interviewers determine how the person feels about the factor and what they really want for themselves? I think often asking questions about how do you know that, or, really understanding how the person reacts in certain circumstances might be helpful. If you could gather information from multiple people, it might be a good way to understand what's really important for the person. I don't know if there are actual resources on our website, Kendra, that would help with this.
So we do have some interviewing webinars that we've done in the past for people who need more support to communicate and those kinds of things. You're really going to try to figure out, what does closeness mean to the person you're interviewing? And that might take a lot of effort to find out, but I think it'll be worthwhile. We can always presume competence, and we always should presume competence when providing education, experience, and exposure. So I'd be looking for that really closely too. Jane asks about working with a young gay man. She lives in a small town where there's not very many gay men. So he's looking for love and intimacy on the internet, and he found someone who's very overpowering. She wants to know if there's a dating website that I know of that is safe. And so Jane, to answer your question, I'm not that familiar with the dating websites for gay men, as far as their safety at least goes. But I would encourage you to listen to the podcast Disability After Dark, because Andrew does talk a lot about this kind of thing. While he's from Toronto, it can be very tough for someone with cerebral palsy who uses a wheelchair to find someone who's willing to have a sexual relationship with him, especially with the type of man he's looking for. So he talks a lot about, staying safe and danger and assuming risk and those kinds of things. And I think it'd be really helpful for this young man's supporters to maybe look into that a little bit before you go towards trying to control what kinds of websites he uses, if that makes sense. Not that I think you're trying to gatekeep or anything like that, but just really making sure you guys have a good understanding of kind of what the culture is there and how to support people would be a good start. Anything to add, Angela?
No, I think that's great.
Okay.
I just listened to Andrew's podcast not that long ago, and it's fantastic.
Ben?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to add that I posted a link in the chat box to our Art of Purposeful Conversations webinar that was referenced in the previous question, just in case anyone wanted to take a look. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
So Caitlin asks, if someone identifies a make-believe significant other as their intimate relationship, how would that influence if the outcome is present or not? Again, we're going to go back to the person. We're going to evaluate whether or not they've had the education, experience, and exposure to really make those choices in their life. And maybe they're trying to tell us what kind of relationship they're looking for with the make-believe significant other. I would really go back to the decision making and just really understand where the person's coming from before making those determinations.
And make sure that the person's had those opportunities to have those other kinds of relationships, you know, with someone who's real, or maybe there's something that's happened in their past. Like, there's a lot of things that we could really explore to find out, you know, what's going on there and what's trying to be communicated. I think that's really important.
Sure.
Good answer, Angela. All right, Caitlin asks, many of those options do not support people with developmental disabilities, unfortunately. And I'm not sure what options we're discussing. I think a lot of the things we've discussed, we're really trying to push the bar here, right? And expect that there's a way to support people no matter what. And if things right now aren't supporting people, then we need to find a way how. It's not if, it's how. And so I would challenge that, right? So we want to support people to have the same kind of experiences that you and I have, no matter what kind of support needs they have. But good point. Something for us to always be considerate of is that our society doesn't always support people, but we have a responsibility to try to. Okay, I think you might be talking about the grief supports. And so,
okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry that we're running into those roadblocks. I don't have a great answer for that besides just trying to educate the community.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So Jennifer is saying that we reference the importance of understanding that guardians generally do not have the right to control this outcome. Is there situations where this would not be the case? And is there a difference between the rules for someone who has a guardian and someone who has state-appointed guardian? I think Kendra's answer to the question earlier about guardianship and just really understanding the person's definition of this outcome and what they're looking for, and then meeting with the guardian and trying to find some common ground. As far as there being a difference between a parental guardian or a state-appointed guardian, I don't know that. Maybe Kendra, you could speak to state-appointed guardian and their role in someone's life.
So in my experience working with the guardianship program in the state I worked in, there's not a difference as far as the roles. And in fact, I would often venture to say that the state-appointed guardians were less involved, but I know that's not the case everywhere. So really making sure that all those guardians have the education they need about what their purpose is as a guardian, right? That's not something that I think is covered often enough. And I think that's a great opportunity for organizations to provide to guardians, whether they're state-appointed or not. But it's also something where protection and advocacy, depending on who they are in your state, can be really helpful for. I've heard good things about things that they've been able to do in some states to support those guardians to understand what their role is.
Right.
Shirley asked, do you see couples cohabitating either married or by choice living in a SILA, ICF, group home, etc.? Shirley, I have seen people cohabitating together in SILAs and group homes. It's not common because of licensing sometimes, but depending on the state, it can happen. I would really support, though, anytime we can, to support people to live in more independent settings, especially when they want to have that level of privacy and intimacy. You know, it's always going to be beneficial to look into alternative ways to support people to have that kind of relationship. But yes, it is possible to do it in SILAs and group homes. ICFs, maybe not so much with the rules, but it's going to depend more on where you live and what the rules are.
So Frank is asking the best way to support a person in a one-sided relationship where the person supported wants more than the other person, which leads to behaviors. So I would question whether or not that's the kind of relationship the person is looking for, maybe just helping them evaluate their experiences and really trying to understand what they're looking for in a relationship and know what their opportunities are to either enhance that relationship or find a new relationship that would meet their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at those 3 E's and making sure the person has them to make informed choices. And it sounds like in this case that the outcome's not present because the person doesn't have the type of relationship that they want, even though they have a relationship. Good question, Frank. I think that comes up for lots of people.
Definitely does. I really have no idea about safe dating sites for the general DD population.
Yeah, my experience with dating sites in general is just supporting people to have the three E's so they can make informed personal choices and use those dating sites as the rest of us do, right? And unfortunately, with the way the world is, that anytime you're dating, you're accepting some level of risk. So making sure people feel comfortable with the level of risk that they're accepting is really the most, the best way forward, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Judith, we don't have a contact list for sexuality therapists. I'm sorry, but if anyone else does and you want to send them to me for me to pass on, we could try to get you in touch, okay?
Amanda's asking about, would anyone have any advice for someone who has a disability who would lose their benefits if they get married?
So Amanda, it's kind of unfortunate that's the way things are right now. I know there's some good advocacy efforts going on to change the way benefits are calculated. I don't have good resources that help today, but I would encourage you to get involved in those advocacy efforts for, you know, how unfair that seems, because it doesn't really seem fair, right? Living together doesn't necessarily lower your expenses when you, yeah, you know where I'm going with that. So yeah, I would encourage you to get involved in advocacy efforts around that. So YAI in New York City has great resources for positive sexual expression. Thank you, Reba. And I'll write that down. If anyone wants to email me and get in contact, we could try to help you guys with that, okay? So that is the last of the questions I see. Thank you guys so much for being such a wonderful audience today. We really appreciate having you and all of your great questions. Of course, if there's anything else you want to talk about, you can always email us or contact anyone at the council, and we're glad to talk about sex or intimacy.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.